what I call the particle physics agenda. And when I say the particle physics agenda, it's a big statement. And every time I come back to this slide, after many years of talking about it, it still shakes me at the core, because I realize how deeply rooted in disinformation and propaganda our education system is, and how it's just getting worse and worse by the looks of it. It's not getting better, but this is not something that happened by accident. The whole particle physics thing happened as a result of people, whoever controls the world, whoever the global elite are, whoever the Illuminati are, whoever these people are that run the world. Some of them might be higher up than we even realize. Some of them might not even be human. We don't know. We just don't know because we don't know, and they don't want us to know because we've been dumbed down and kept in this slave race camp of ours called Earth, and we don't know. It's like, the sheep on a farm will never know what TV channels the farmer watches at night if the farmer doesn't want the sheep to know. So it's that simple. So, when people ask, why would they do that? And the answer to that is very simple, because that's what they want to do. That's what they do. We try and rationalize the thinking of these invisible, mysterious elite or aliens or whoever they may be. We don't really know what the final, the true reason behind their actions is. So the particle physics agenda is such a huge lie. It's just part of the big lie of NASA, right? Pretty much everything NASA tells us is mostly a lie, with some little shreds of truth in between that give away the actual story. It's the golden thread that's surrounded by just infinite lies to hide that golden thread. Because if you don't have the golden thread of truth through your lies, all the lies fall apart. So you literally have to keep that golden thread of truth there. Then you confuse everything by misdirection and deception and so forth. So let's carry on with this particle physics agenda. This started in the late 1800s already, when whoever the guys running the world are that have a lot more knowledge than we have today. Obviously, these are very advanced beings, I guess, who just play. It's a game. They're playing a game of some sort. I don't know. It's what it feels like more and more. So this is what they make us believe. Okay, mainstream science make us believe that the entire universe is filled from the Big Bang. From the Big Bang, all these particles come out of the Big Bang, and from the Big Bang, the universe is filled with tiny subatomic particles. Now, pay attention to this: subatomic particles that bump into each other randomly, billions and billions and trillions and gazillions of times, randomly bumping. Eventually, out of those random cosmic collisions, they create everything in creation through random cosmic coincidence. Okay, it's a mouthful, but let's say it again. So there's infinite number of particles that all emerged in a miracle out of the Big Bang, has filled the universe, and by bumping into each other over and over and over and over and over again, eventually they create something like you and me and our capacity to reason and argue, or a bunny, or ants, or anything else, all the plants on Earth, all the insects, all the mechanisms that flow between soil, water, plants, the digestive systems in our bodies. That all is a consequence of random particles bumping into each other. Please try and digest this. Try and digest this insanity and fantasy and science fiction hocus pocus nonsense that they've managed to convince many people that this is actually how things started, right? So the question is why? Well, my answer to that is to remove us from creation, the miracle of creation, and to remove us from the creator itself. You can call it God if you want to. God, the creator of the universe and all things in it, or the creator, or the source code. And to remove us from all of that and the unity consciousness that we all share, that we've been separated from, and also preventing us from realizing that we are the creators of our own reality. And that's what started to happen with the whole quantum mechanics and the quantum field studies in the late 1900s, 1800s, early 1900s. The guys that were working in that field, in those fields, very smart guys, and they were really exploring new frontiers and making some discoveries that should have completely changed our future, our science, our physics, the technology we use today, the way we live, everything. And that was then very strictly controlled. All their discoveries were controlled, and only the agenda that they wanted to was taken forward as part of the global agenda. And the particle physics agenda was part of that agenda. So, you know, they tell us in particle or quantum physics, they tell us all the time that we're the makers of our own reality. And then we carry on onto all the nonsense with the Newtonian physics, that this is not possible, that's not possible, and magic is not possible, and all of that stuff, right? So, and this particle physics agenda, I think for me, it really starts in 1492, and in a really big way, when the famous astronomer of the time, Martin of Bohemia, who's also known Martin of Boheim, 1492, was asked by the King of Portugal to make him the Earth in the shape of a ball. Pay attention to that. Now, this is a very interesting, nugget to throw into the whole ball Earth, flat Earth theory, or argument, should I say, ball Earth, flat Earth argument. The fact that the first time in history that we see the Earth created as a ball became known as the aardapfel, and it was done by Martin of Boheim of Bohemia for the King of Portugal. I suspect that that was an interesting move to start presenting the Earth as a particle, because from there it gets very crazy and very weird. You know, particles of all shapes and sizes, from the smallest to the very, very largest, much bigger than the Earth. So a universe filled with particles. So I suspect, because the nature of our reality is quite possibly so far removed from what we've been led to believe, and by this I mean space, what space is there really a space, or is it all a lie? Is it an infinite toroidal field that just never ends, and just different layers like in an onion? Is that what we live in? And you know, remember, this was described like that before, for thousands of years. Many astronomers and wise people described Earth and the universe in various ways. The way that we've accepted it over the last 200 years or last 500 years, the way we've accepted it over the last 500 years is not the way it was always accepted by very, very smart people of the past. So you got to have a strong stomach and a really open mind to be able to deal with this stuff. So I find this really fascinating. It was also at this time when if you think about this, in the late 1400s, it's when the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and mostly the Spaniards and the Portuguese started to send out the ships across the world, and they started to invade, explore, and invade the other countries and the other lands, and cause havoc and death and destruction, and just capture the lands and destroy the locals and so forth. But that's when those guys started to sail their ships across the world. And in those days, up to that point, the world was always presented as on a flat map in a circle. So literally a flat Earth map, right? So they would then, and many of those feared that they would go off the edge of the world. Remember the stories, like, oh, if you go too far, you're going to fall off the edge of the world. And I think this has something to do with that, to try and show those captains and those maritime people in the late 1400s that they're not going to fall off the edge of the Earth, that, look, you're just going to go around the Earth like this. And I suspect the reason why the King of Portugal asked for this, to show the mariners and the guys that they send out in their ships that this is what the Earth looks like. So you're not going to fall off the edge of the Earth. Whether this is true or not, I'll leave that open to people with different belief systems. And I find this is a brilliant masterstroke, absolute masterstroke. So let's carry on. And that brings us back to Nikola Tesla, because now we're dealing with particle physics, the quantum mechanics, the particle physics agenda, and how that's been woven into our world over the last 150 years at this stage. So Nikola says, if you want to find the secrets to the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Everybody should know this by now. And I find it interesting when you go to a movie today, even today, movies are still, it's literally, just a sequence of still photographs that come one after another in a specific frequency. So, 24 frames a second. When film came out in 35mm film, it was 24 frames a second and 24 stills frames per second, and that creates the illusion of motion. So when you have a particle that's sitting still, if I want to call it a particle, and that particle starts to vibrate, it comes to life. So if you think of a frame as standing still, but the moment it starts to vibrate and has motion, it comes to life. So there's a very interesting comparison between how we can take a still photograph or sequence of still photographs and make us believe that that's real. There's real motion and real life happening there. Fascinating if you just think about it a little bit like that. So, and that takes us in the continuation of the particle physics agenda. It takes us into in search of the God particle, and that became the obsession, because the whole obsession with the particle physics and the particle universe started in 1887 with the whole complex idea of finding the ether, of proving that the ether exists. So what is the ether? The ether is this miraculous invisible substance. We went through this in a previous lecture. So the ether is this invisible miraculous substance, sometimes called like a liquid, sometimes called a watery, viscous liquid substance that fills all of the universe. But the ether is this substance that is the mechanism in which the universe can function. Our brain is getting stuck there again. It's the field in which the stars, the particles, and everything can move, because you need a field through or a medium through which these things can move and be held together. Right. So for thousands of years, ancient Greeks and even before them, they were talking about the ether as this invisible substance that holds everything together. And then by 1887, a phenomenal thing happened. The Michelson-Morley experiment. I'm not sure why some people pronounce it Michelson, because it's spelled Michelson. So I pronounce it Michelson-Morley experiment, 1887. I haven't found out how Michelson pronounced his own name. Maybe he did pronounce it Michelson. In that case, I apologize. But these two were, and in those days, the most famous scientists in the world. Okay, they were on top of the pyramid, and they literally were among the most famous scientists on Earth that ever lived. And they started the Michelson-Morley experiment, which in those days was at that time the most advanced scientific experiment ever conducted in all of human history. Now, pay attention to that. This is not a little thing that they did in their lab, or this was a global experiment. Everyone was involved in this. Everyone was participating, wanted to see what the outcome was going to be. And what this Michelson-Morley experiment was all about is to prove the existence of the ether, because now for thousands of years, we've been talking about the ether as the substance that holds the universe together. So how do you prove the existence of the ether? And they were going to do it by showing the Earth's movement through the ether. Right? It's a very simple thing. And what they did is they created this very extensive experiment that projected light in different directions, either parallel to the motion of the Earth through space, and some in the same direction as the Earth is moving, and then they reconvene the light. And if the Earth is moving through space, then there would be a slight, tiny little difference in the time upon which the light arrives at where they meet. So they split a light beam, move it in one direction and another, bring it together, and there should be a tiny little difference that shows the movement of the Earth through space. So they set this up, everybody is waiting for the results, and the answer came, and they could not prove that the Earth was moving through space. There was, and from my research on this, they did this over, I think, a 2-year period. They did more than 50 experiments all over the place, and never could they ever show any kind of movement of Earth through space. So this is a big, big problem for all of science. So now you already know what I'm thinking, and you're probably thinking the same. So if they can't prove that the Earth is not moving through space, then maybe the Earth is not moving through space. Maybe somebody's been lying to us. Because until then, what do we know? None of us have been to space. We observe the things with telescope in the skies. We have no idea what's going on out there. And we assume things because things are moving around us. Obviously, we can explain all those motions, by the way, with toroidal fields, right? So let me come back to the toroidal fields. If you're thinking space and this vast expanse, just, things flying in randomly everywhere, that's not the case. There's a very definite structure to space, and that structure we know already is a toroidal structure. But we know that from galaxies, from solar systems, and so forth. So there must be some sort of a, everything we observe from space actually can be explained with the toroidal method. Excuse me. So instead of saying, okay, we have a problem here, Houston, the Earth is not moving through space. What's going on? What have we missed here? They are so confident that the Earth must be moving through space that they conclude the following. And the conclusion is that there is no ether. You can imagine how insane that conclusion is. So if there is no ether, what holds the universe together? What holds everything together? That's just such a nonsensical statement to make. It's like saying, hi, nice to meet you, John, but unfortunately you don't exist. I know that you're standing right here in front of me, but I can see your eyes, I can see your body, and I can see your hair, but you don't exist because you're not moving, or something stupid like that, Anyway, so, and that really, this is one of my favorite parts of this thing, really. The conclusion is there is no ether, and the ether is replaced by a particle universe. This is really important. And the particle universe was so crazy and so inexplicable that it needed Albert Einstein to come up with a theory of relativity to explain the whole particle physical universe. This is such a concocted, brilliant setup and a scheme to take us away from vibration, resonance, frequency, toroidal fields, the comprehension of torus fields, choroidal fields, how everything is interconnected, how everything communicates instantaneously, how we can communicate instantaneously. They just rip that apart, they remove the ether, and they replace it with a particle universe with these infinite particles that come out of the Big Bang, bump into each other infinite number of times, and eventually, after bumping into each other so many times, they create bigger particles, and they create atoms, and they create DNA, and then they create conscious DNA that codes for creating animals and plants and insects. That's the insanity they created when they brought forth the particle universe and replaced the ether. Just understand how important this moment in our recent history was. So the paradox, however, is that particles need a medium to move through. So understand, once again, this is Albert Einstein's work was so important that they had to use his theory of relativity to argue all of this into some sort of semblance of possibility. So then comes along in 1897, literally 10 years after Michelson-Morley. Okay, Michelson-Morley experiment shows that the Earth doesn't move through space, or there is no ether. 10 years later, here comes J.J. Thomson with his experiment. and a theoretical particle called the electron. And J.J. Thomson eventually wins a Nobel Prize for discovering a theoretical particle called the electron. And the whole world buys it. The electron becomes the most spoken about and studied subatomic particle, and all the structure of the atom starts to come into place. But let's just see what Thomson discovered. So in Thomson's first experiment, he discovered that cathode rays and the charge they deposited were intrinsically linked together. In the second experiment, he discovered that the charge in the cathode ray was negative, and therefore he deduced that the cathode rays were made up of negatively charged particles, and he ended up calling those electrons. So we have a big problem here, because that experiment can very easily be explained with toroidal field energy, toroidal field spin, toroidal field positive and negative spin. And so you can, again, keep in mind, the moment you approach any argument or any problem in science, physics, or cosmology, in quantum mechanics, if you approach it from a toroidal field perspective, you can explain and understand anything. And this is how we can also see how these early experiments with these scientists, and they were brilliant minds, they were doing incredible work. If only they had embraced the toroidal field structure, they would have reached completely different conclusions. And so now we have the birth of an electron, and that the whole world embraced. And then literally 10 years later again, J.J. Thomson's experiment with the cathode ray tube showed that all atoms contain tiny negative charged subatomic particles, or electrons. Thomson proposed the plum pudding model. This was the first model of the atom Thomson proposed after discovering the electron. And he suggested that the atom was a negatively charged electrons embedded within a positively charged soup, right? So then you got to ask yourself, what is that soup made of, right? So these are, the moment you start really breaking down these discoveries and the ridiculous conclusions, let's not call them ridiculous, just misinformed conclusions, because they started from the wrong foundational body of knowledge. So positively charged, negatively charged particles called electrons embedded in a positively charged soup. So, and then literally 10 years later, in 1909, here comes Rutherford, who then did the study on what the structure of an atom looks like. And literally Rutherford then gave the guys that were controlling the direction of these new discoveries, he gave them the perfect tool for disinformation and deception that we still use today. And that is that the atom has a solid nucleus, that at the center of an atom, there is a solid nucleus. And that nucleus is held together by the strong force. And why is it called the strong force? It's because the force of that holds the particles in the nucleus, the force that holds those particles together is so strong that it is literally physically impossible to hold that nucleus together. And they can't really figure out how that nucleus is held together, because it should literally just explode. And the energy that is required to hold that nucleus together is so vast that I recall many, many years ago seeing some scientists and physicists show calculations and papers that show the energy required to hold one nucleus of one atom together is more than all the energy required to manifest the entire universe, or something like that. It's a spectacular argument that they pose. I can't remember the details, but I remember I was really intrigued by that when I first came across that. So let's quickly go through what Rutherford discovered here. What he discovered, what he observed. He didn't discover anything. Okay, this is really important. The structure of the atom that we get sold today is completely and utterly wrong. Okay, so you need to put that out of your mind. The moment you put that out of your mind, it'll be a lot easier for you to understand the simplicity of the nature of reality around us and how things really work. So what Rutherford did is he had a source where, like you can see, the source of particles, and he shot these particles at a thin silver, a thin gold foil, the thinnest possible gold foil that they could find. So there'd be, as few layers of gold atoms as possible. So what they did, they shot these particles, and then they had this the fluorescent screen around it, and the particles would shoot away, and they would light up when they hit the fluorescent screen, like a charged particle or whatever. So it lights up when it hits the fluorescent screen. So they were shooting these particles at this thin film of gold, a foil of gold, and they found that the particles were deflecting and reflecting all over the place, and some of them came straight back, and the conclusion to them then was that there must be something solid at the center of the atoms, because otherwise it would not bounce the particle straight back. And that remained the conclusion, that there's a solid nucleus at the center of the atom. And we all know what the atomic model looks like today. We recognize this is a symbol they use for atoms all over the world. They still use it today. But even this little graphic is wrong, based on even the more recent deception that they're trying to confuse us with. It's literally it is a psychosis. It's almost a disease that's just going after this wrong model. So there's the infinite dense, there's the dense nucleus in the center of the atom, surrounded by electrons, and these electrons fly around, they spin around, right? They tell us that the electrons spin around. So they make us believe that the electrons are physical things, physical particles that are actually spinning around like balls. So please understand this. When any particle that has a mass or anything like that, as it spins, it creates centrifugal forces. So just think about that. If these electrons are spinning so fast, the kind of centrifugal forces they create, just that thought alone is insane. But let's carry on. So the model of the electron as we have it today is completely and utterly incorrect. And many top scientists, hundreds and thousands of leading scientists, physicists, molecular physicists, astrophysicists, all believe this. They know that this is wrong. They know what the real shape and structure of an atom is and an electron is, but they're never listened to. They never get the platform to share their knowledge, because the global elite keep propping up their puppets that keep promoting this wrong and this incorrect conclusion and the lies about quantum mechanics, particles, and this whole lie that we've been sold for 120, 140 years now, since the 1880s. It's unbelievable. So, and then the orbiting electrons, right? You can see the orbiting electrons. They orbit like planets. They orbit the sun. These orbiting electrons, and you can start seeing how the particle physics agenda is taken from the very large to the very small, and making us believe that what we observe in an atom is exactly what we're seeing around us. That all these little balls or particles called planets are spinning around the center of the center of the solar system, which is the sun, which is this very powerful force at the center. And you can start seeing there's a very powerful connection in the particle physics agenda between the galactic and the microscopic, or the quantum, the subatomic. And then these spinning electrons create even a bigger problem. Now they start, they call them atomic orbital models. Have you ever tried to understand atomic orbital models? Just do yourself a favor. Try and watch videos on it and try and understand what they're trying to explain to you. And you realize very quickly, this has become such a complex thing and they've complicated it so much that, boy, oh boy, it is just unbelievable. And I guess they do this because they try and make ordinary people believe that this is only for the very clever people. This is only for the professors and the geniuses out there. Only they can understand this, because mere mortals like me, I can't understand this. It's far too complicated. So these are just some of the diagrams of orbital models that you find when you Google it and research it. And you see from the diagrams how difficult it is for them to even show it schematically. They struggle to show it schematically because it is such a mess. It's such an absolute nonsensical lie, and it's a mess. They're all dealing with particles, right? These are all particles moving around, and particle in this level and two particles in that level. And then if there are two particles here, there can only be one particle there, and this particle has to bond with that particle. And then if there are two particles there, there must be two particles here. And then there's all these levels and these layers and this confusion. It is a freaking nightmare. So here's another just spectacular, demonstration of the complexity. But what I find interesting is that in some of these models of the orbital models of electrons inside an atom, all right, so remember, they're telling us that inside the atom, it's electrons that are orbiting. That's it. Electrons are orbiting, and that's what it has. So we have this atom, the nucleus that is solid, absolutely solid, hard nucleus. It's called nuclear fusion, right? Nuclear reactors. It's all to do with breaking up the energy in the nucleus, which is all, and when you start going down that road, you realize how many deceptions there are in those study fields as well. In any case, so, and here what I find fascinating is that some of these diagrams start to approximate toroidal fields. You see these little donuts? The moment you start seeing donuts, I get excited. So they seem to be going in the right direction, because a donut represents a toroidal field. But they don't go as far as saying that. So they have to almost show it and indicate it in a diagram with a toroidal field or a donut, but they never tell you that it's actually a toroidal field. And therefore, all the laws that apply to toroidal fields, the sound, resonance, frequencies, the magnetic fields, the counterspin, the positive, the negative, the yin yang, all of the basic stuff that apply to toroidal fields apply to the atom. And it has got nothing to do with these confusing, nonsensical spinning electrons inside a ball or a beach ball or something like that, because that's what people imagine. Here you go. You can see the onion and the onion ring effect of they try and tell us in the electron. And yet there is some semblance of truth in that, because the toroidal shape of the atomic field, the atom is a toroidal shape, so is the electron, right? So they vibrate, and their vibration creates the toroidal field. That's what we see. We recognize it, and we measure the energies of those vibrating toroidal fields that we call atoms and electrons. So, and the atoms and the toroidal fields are like Russian dolls. There's this size one, and there's another bigger one. It's another bigger one. So in a way, it is indicating toroidal field structure, the scalar effect of toroidal fields. There's a word scalar in there, right? The harmonic resonant frequencies that hold toroidal fields together. So in there is a scalar effect, and we see it in these demonstrations, but they just lie about what's really going on here. And that brings us to some of the bright minds in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that were all part of that, what I call, quantum mechanics, particle physics, rat pack. I'll show you who they are very soon. What's the time now? Okay, we got another 7 or 10 minutes. This is one of my favorite guys, Heisenberg, and this Werner Heisenberg. Now, keep in mind, I think he was 25 or 27 when he won his Nobel Prize. This is ridiculous, right? And then at that age, and you can imagine that happens to you, and then suddenly you made the head of a major German university in the 20s. The ego must have been through the roof, right? So Heisenberg, but clearly a very smart guy. And he was the first guy that actually started to talk about these electrons that, in fact, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle makes it very clear that the electron cannot be a particle, right? This is just, and so let's just see what he said. So one cannot simultaneously determine both the position and the momentum of an electron. In other words, where it's going. So the more certain you are about where the electron is, the less certain you can be about where it is going. Or the more certain you are about where the electron is going, the less certain you can be about where it is. And this is very important. So he's hinting at the fact that the electrons cannot really be particles, right? And then this guy here, very not well known in in school, no one learns about this guy. And he's probably one of the most important participants in this whole explosion of the quantum mechanics and particle physics and that whole incredible discovery that they were making in those days. Louis de Broglie, French physicist, best known for his research on quantum theory and for predicting the wave nature of electrons. Pay attention to this. He predicted that electrons were not physical particles, that they were actually waves, vibrations, and not necessarily particles. So I suspect that maybe his work, it was already going in the right direction. It was moving very, very rapidly in explaining, or supporting what Nikola Tesla was saying, that everything is vibration, frequency, and energy. So he showed that electrons have this strange vibrational energy, and this is beautiful. And he won a Nobel Prize for this in 1929. Just a little bit more. In 1924, Louis de Broglie, excuse me, introduced the idea that particles such as electrons could be described not only as particles, but also as waves. Very important, right? So it's the whole particle wave duality that comes to life here. And that becomes part of the particle physics insanity, I think, moment. So de Broglie, an electron standing wave vibrating in an orbit around a nucleus. Can you see what he's doing here? He's very clearly describing harmonic resonant frequencies, toroidal fields. There's the nucleus. What he's drawn here is showing a donut from the top. You're looking at the donut from the top. There's the hole in the middle. That's what's known as the well, in toroidal fields, it's known as the 0 point, or as Nassim Haramein calls it, the vacuum. And the vacuum of the 0 point has infinite density. Okay, pay attention. Infinite density. Nassim has proven it many times. We know it from toroidal fields, and we know how when things pass through a toroidal field, if you've seen my videos of the torus stones, how they generate energy, when you put sound frequency through it and it goes to that 0 point, it amplifies the energy. It amplifies the energy, and it comes out amplified or hotter on the other side. So what de Broglie actually did here, he drew, without realizing it, a toroidal field, showing us the vibrational energies, the movement of the torus around the sides, and the central, the hole through a donut shape, or the infinite density of the 0 point at the center of the torus. And the fact that he says only integral numbers of wavelengths are allowed, that's a very important statement. Pay attention to that. Only integral numbers of wavelengths are allowed. He's telling us that this is a harmonic resonant frequency situation. And that's why it is solid. That's why it is stable. It doesn't break apart, because it is held together by harmonic coherent resonance. And that's what everything in nature and everything in creation is held together with. Electrons act not only as particles, but as waves. Okay, we've covered this. And I spoke about the quantum mechanics rat pack. And here they are. This is a wonderful photograph from 1927 at the 1927 Solvay conference in Brussels. And I found this a very interesting place. I suspect that, who was this guy? French, Solvay conference is French, Conseil Solvay. So he was a French, very wealthy guy, obviously, in Brussels. And he held these every year, or not every year. Well, I think they were held every year, but it was interrupted by World War I and then World War II again. And let me just come back to this. You'll notice there's only one woman there, and that's Madame Curie. And the rest of them all there, Einstein in the middle, there's Max Planck to the right of Einstein. There's, Max Planck further to the right, second from the left in front. All the big names are here. All the big names are here. There's de Broglie in the second row. So they got all these guys together for a month. I think it was a month, and they would just have lectures every day. Well, let's read what it says here. So the Solvay conference, the French Conseil Solvay conferences held in Brussels by the international, sorry, I've obscured my thing here. Let me close this. International Solvay Institute for Physics and Chemistry. The Belgian chemist and industrial Ernest Solvay was the founder of this and these conferences, very wealthy guy, obviously. He, first one occurring in 1911, and then the first in chemistry in 1922. So the physics in 1911, chemistry 22. They were interrupted by World War I and II. Since they have kept a 3-year schedule, since then they have kept a 3-year schedule with physics conferences in the first year, no conferences in the second year, and the chemistry conference in the third year. The conferences were usually divided into morning and afternoon sessions that opened with 1 or 2 reviews of subject, followed by extensive time for discussion. Right, so this is what I'm realizing. What these guys did is they brought all these guys together and they heard all their views and their arguments and their discoveries and their minds, and then they extracted out of those all the ideas that they could use to promote their agenda to keep humanity enslaved and dumbed down and moving away from the true knowledge and the true nature of reality. So it was a fantastically orchestrated show to the world of how brilliant we are, and then shutting everything down by not allowing any of that brilliance to reach us, and just using what you want out of that to promote your agenda as the slave master. And that's just such a masterstroke. But then, you know, we got to take our hats off to these people, whether it's artificial intelligence or aliens that are controlling some humans that are doing all this, who knows at this stage. So it was chaired by Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz, running from October 24 to 29, 1927. The 5th physics conference was devoted to electrons and photons. Pay attention here. So this is now the 5th. So this is 27. This is 40 years after the discovery of the electron. Okay, electrons and photons, but was dominated by disputes about the ideas behind the quantum mechanics. This is important. There was already argument about the particles and the quantum mechanics in those days, in 1927. Because in 1925, Danish physicist Niels Bohr and German physicist Werner Heisenberg and Max Born, among others, had formed what came to be known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. It's known as a Copenhagen interpretation, which postulated that the indeterminacy, they can't determine something. The indeterminacy in the theory was fundamental and should be accepted by science. In other words, that only the probability of a result could be predicted. Only the probability, but not the actual result. Therefore, the indeterminacy of the theory, right? And therefore, the fundamental and should be accepted by science, because it was indeterminate. And there was no underlying deterministic order to be found. Some physicists, most notably Albert Einstein, did not accept the Copenhagen interpretation and felt that its reliance on indeterminacy or confusion or lack of knowledge, or whatever you want to call it, showed that the quantum mechanics still was not a complete theory, and that the dispute was foregrounded at 1927 conference. So Bohr, Heisenberg, and Born were then not able to win Einstein over, but anyhow, the dissemination on the Copenhagen interpretation among the physicists was accelerated by the conference and eventually became the prevailing view of quantum mechanics. So there were a lot of confusion and arguments and disagreements. So it's not as if there was a discovery and everybody agreed and look, here's the particle, this is how it works. Wow, it's so obvious, it's so awesome to see. So there has been constant resistance and disagreement from the very beginning of the electron, of the discovery of subatomic particles, the structure of the atom, and all of the stuff that we get taught as scientific fact in our school curriculum education system, all the way from primary school up to you graduate in university in whatever field of science. These fields are taught as fact, and if you do not regurgitate them the way that you learn them from the textbook, you will fail and everybody will think you're stupid. And that's why we can see and know exactly how evil the education system is, by keeping on or promoting this lack of knowledge, completely baseless scientific conclusions based on theories and postulates that are based on the wrong foundation, the wrong models, and therefore reach the wrong conclusions. So keep in mind that Max Planck, and I think we probably going to stop very soon and start going through questions and Q&A. So keep in mind that Max Planck is known as the father of quantum mechanics, the quantum leap. Max Planck was a German theoretical physicist, discovered the quantum of energy, quantum of action, or energy quanta in 1900, known as Planck's constant, or H. And this work laid the foundation for the quantum theory, which won him the Nobel Prize in physics in 1918. Now, remember, the quantum leap. What does that mean? The particle disappears in one place and appears in another place instantaneously. It doesn't move between here and there. That is known as magic. In our world, it's known as magic. In quantum mechanics, it's totally acceptable. An electron disappears here and appears over there, right? Keep in mind, this is why at the quantum level, everything we know to be real in the physical world completely changes, and the opposite becomes true in the quantum world. So Max Planck's quantum leap, electrons jump between the quantum levels from one level to the next. They do not move gradually. Pay attention, this is really important. They disappear in one place and reappear in another place. In other words, there's teleportation going on here, right? Or bilocation. So you realize in the physical world, a particle cannot move from here to there instantaneously unless something magic happens. And we know what that magic is. We know what that magic is. But the best part about Max Planck, which I love so much, which was never promoted by mainstream physics and been hidden from view, where he actually tells us that we're not really in control, that there's a higher force in control behind this quantum leap or this teleportation capacity of subatomic particles like electrons. And that is consciousness. And this is his famous quote. He says, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." Oh my goodness. If only they could teach this to first year or high school students in chemistry and physics class and first year students in all scientific courses. Start with this statement, that everything we see, all the matter in the world around us comes from a field of consciousness. It is truly beautiful. And this is a Nobel Prize winner that is used by mainstream science and physics all the time, shoved in our face, used as an argument to argue completely different value sets. And you just got to just love the way that the global elite that are masters of propaganda, masters of manipulation, masters of lying and deceiving, can take a beautiful statement like this and an incredible mind like Max Planck and twist it to make us still believe that the models of atoms and electrons and subatomic particles that they're teaching us or apparently researching are actually what they're doing. Okay, so keep in mind, I'm going to end here now and we're going to go to our Q&A. Keep in mind that the physical world we realize around us, or we interact with around us, is a vibrational state. Just like stationary standing movie frames create the illusion of reality when they start to move, the particles and the atoms, the subatomic particles, create the illusion of reality and this physical form because of the state of vibration, resonance, and the coherent harmonic resonance with which they connect to each other. And every frequency has a set of reactions that presents a different manifestation of a different density It's very obvious because the frequencies have different vibrations, different frequencies, and therefore different densities. And so everything in our reality is a consequence of vibration, resonance, frequency that we perceive as sound in our reality. And that comes out of this infinite form of energy or creation, or the mind of God, that Max Planck calls the field of consciousness.